For the first time in 12 years, no smoke filled the air. No sizzling sounds, no apron around my waist. I stood in the middle of Diane's patio, wearing a clean shirt, no stains, no sweat, just holding a bag of unopened frozen hot dogs and beef patties from the gas station. All eyes turned to me. The music died. Brandon's Bluetooth speaker crackled and cut off mid-beat. Diane stared at the meat like I'd dropped roadkill on her marble counter. Brandon chuckled nervously. "Is this a joke, Uncle Ethan?" Uncle Ray sipped his beer and looked away. Sophie stood frozen, eyes locked on mine, sensing something deeper was going on. "No joke," I said, placing the tray on the outdoor table without ceremony. "I figured I'd just do what the rest of you do. Bring whatever, show up late, and let someone else clean." No one laughed. No one clapped. No one moved. It was the first time in years that they noticed me not cooking, and that silence, that dead, stunned silence, that was the first time I ever truly felt seen. But let me take you back. Let me show you how I became the invisible man behind the smoke and fire. It all began after Mom passed away, and Diane, my older sister, took over, hosting the Sunday barbecues at the family house in Riverbend. Our parents had left the place to both of us, but Diane had quickly claimed it as her domain. I didn't fight her on it. I never fought Diane on anything. She was 10 years older, always certain, always in control. The Sunday gatherings became our new family ritual, not because anyone particularly missed Mom's pot roast or Dad's outdated jokes, but because people love consistency. And me, I became part of the furniture. I remember the first time I took over the grill. It was 3 weeks after the funeral. Everyone was still wearing that awkward grief face. You know the one, where they're trying to smile but their eyes look haunted. Diane had bought some cheap burger patties, but nobody was stepping up to cook them. "I can do it," I said, more to fill the silence than anything else. Diane handed me the spatula without looking at me. "Just don't burn them, Ethan." I didn't. In fact, I made them better than Dad ever had. I discovered I had a knack for timing, for knowing exactly when to flip, when to press, when to let the meat breathe. By the end of that afternoon, plates were clean. People had seconds. For a brief moment, I felt something like purpose warming my chest. "You should do this every week," Uncle Ray said quietly, as I was cleaning the grill afterward. Uncle Ray hardly ever spoke, so when he did, people listened. Except nobody else was around to hear it. They were all inside, gathered around Diane as she showed off the new curtains she'd picked for Mom's old sitting room. "Yeah, maybe I will," replied. And so it began. Every Sunday for 12 years, rain or shine, I bought the meat, prepped the sides, mixed the marinades, lit the coals, cleaned up, drove home to my empty apartment 15 miles away. Week after week, I'd scroll through the family group chat after the barbecue, seeing dozens of smiling photos posted. There was Brandon, Diane's son, flexing with the tongs like he was the one manning the grill, Diane with her signature sangria in hand, Uncle Ray half smiling in the back, cousins, neighbors, friends of friends who became regulars, and me, never once in the frame, not even my hands flipping the burgers, not even my shadow. At first I told myself I didn't care, that I was glad to help, that service was love. That's what Mom always used to say, right? Love is doing, without being asked. But Mom had been seen, Mom had been thanked. Mom had albums full of photos where she was center stage, presiding over Thanksgiving dinners or Christmas mornings. I had nothing but grease stains on my favorite shirts and the scent of smoke that never quite washed out of my hair. One Sunday, about 5 years in, Sophie, Diane's colleague from the hospital where they both worked as nurses, came up to me as I scraped burnt ribs off the grill long after everyone else had gone inside for dessert. "You know they act like this thing runs itself, right?" she said gently. "Like food just magically appears hot and seasoned." I chuckled, trying not to show how much her noticing had affected me. "Someone's got to do it." She tilted her head, tucking a strand of her auburn hair behind her ear. "Yeah, but it doesn't always have to be you." Something about the way she said it, not with pity but with a clear-eyed assessment, made me look at her, really look at her, for the first time. Sophie had been coming to these barbecues for years, but somehow we'd never really talked. She was quiet like me, observant. She stood at the edges of photos rather than the center. "I don't mind," I lied. "Yes, you do," she said simply. Then she picked up a brush and helped me clean the grill, her movements methodical and sure. That night, driving home with the windows down to air out the smoke smell from my clothes, I thought about what Sophie had said. I thought about the hours I spent prepping each week, the hundreds of dollars I'd spent on meat and charcoal, the birthdays I'd missed with friends because Sundays were sacred, Sundays were for family. But was I family? Or was I just the help? The next morning, I woke up with a strange feeling in my chest. It wasn't quite anger. It wasn't quite sadness. It was something in between, a dull ache of recognition that had been there all along, just beneath the surface, waiting for someone like Sophie to bring it into the light. That's when I made a decision, not to confront anyone, not to demand appreciation, just to watch, to pay attention, to keep a mental tally of who asked how my week was going, who offered to help, who even acknowledged that I was the one feeding them week after week. The answer was sobering. Almost no one, except for Sophie, who always made a point to thank me before she left. And Uncle Ray, who would nod at me from across the yard, a silent acknowledgement from one invisible person to another. Everyone else? They ate my food, complimented the flavors to each other, never to me, and then posted photos that made it seem like these magical feasts appeared out of thin air. Or worse, like Brandon was the one making it all happen. Things got worse the year Brandon bought his first condo. He was 28, working at some tech startup downtown, and suddenly he was the golden boy of the Monroe family. Never mind that I'd been quietly paying my mortgage for 15 years on a teacher's salary. Never mind that I'd been the one keeping these family traditions alive while Brandon was away at college or backpacking through Europe on Diane's dime. Diane printed shirts with Monroe Legacy on them for one barbecue, with Brandon's initials embroidered underneath. She handed them out like party favors. I got one too, of course, 3 sizes too large, as if she'd never bothered to notice what size I wore despite seeing me every week for over a decade. Meanwhile, I was still bringing charcoal in the trunk of my beat-up truck, parking around the corner so it wouldn't clutter Diane's driveway. One Sunday in June, I arrived early as usual. The summer heat was brutal, making the air shimmer above the pavement. I unloaded the coolers of marinated meat, ribs I'd prepped the night before, chicken thighs that had been soaking in my special blend for 2 days, and homemade sausages from the butcher, who knew me by name now. As I set up, I overheard Diane talking to our new neighbor, Mrs. Patel, who was helping arrange flowers on the tables. "Brandon's the reason we can do all this," Diane was saying, her voice carrying that proud mom lilt. "He brings people together. Always has, since he was little." I nearly dropped the bag of charcoal I was pouring. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the raw meat on the pristine white tablecloths Diane had just set out. I was the one who brought the food. I was the one who brought the people together, because people follow food. They follow warmth, but they never followed me. Mrs. Patel caught my eye over Diane's shoulder. She gave me a small, confused smile. She'd only moved in a month ago, but she'd already figured out who was really running these gatherings. I forced a smile back and kept working. That day, as people arrived, I noticed something I'd never paid attention to before. The way they'd all greet Diane first, then Brandon, then circulate through the yard, filling plates, laughing, drinking. A few would wave at me from a distance, but most didn't even make eye contact. I was just part of the background, like the grill itself, useful but unremarkable. Halfway through the afternoon, Brandon came over with a couple of his tech bros, beers in hand. "Yo, Uncle E," he said, slapping me on the back hard enough to make me stumble. "Looking good, man. Can we get some of those ribs now? The guys are starving." "They need another 20 minutes, I said, not looking up from the grill. "Come on, you can make an exception, right? We've got to head out early. There's this party downtown." I glanced up at him, at his perfectly styled hair and designer sunglasses, at the Monroe Legacy t-shirt that actually fit him. "Food's ready when it's ready, Brandon. You can't rush good barbecue." He frowned, not used to being told no. "Whatever, man. Just hurry it up." He turned to his friends. "My uncle's super strict about his cooking times. It's like a religion with him." They laughed, and I heard one of them mutter, "Grill sergeant," as they walked away. Religion. That's what he thought this was. A hobby, a passion. Not labor, not service, not 12 years of showing up when no one else would. That evening, after everyone had eaten their fill and moved inside to escape the mosquitoes, I stayed behind to clean up as usual. The yard was littered with paper plates, napkins, empty beer, bottles. No one ever offered to help with this part. It was just expected that I would handle it. As I was scraping down the grill grates, I heard the door slide open. Sophie stepped out, holding 2 glasses of lemonade. "Thought you might be thirsty," she said, handing me one. "Thanks." I took a long drink, suddenly realizing how parched I was. I'd been so busy serving others that I'd barely eaten or drunk anything myself. Sophie leaned against the deck railing, watching me work. "You know, I've been coming to these barbecues for what, 6 years now?" "7, I corrected without thinking. She smiled. 7. "And in all that time, I've never seen Diane or Brandon help you clean up, not once." I shrugged. "It's fine. I don't mind." "Yes, you do," she said, echoing our conversation from years ago. "And you should." I stopped scrubbing and looked at her. "What do you want me to do, Sophie? Make a scene? Demand appreciation? That's not me." "No," she said thoughtfully. "That's not you. But maybe you could just stop. Just once. See what happens." I laughed, but it came out hollow. "They'd probably just order pizza and forget I was ever part of this." "Maybe," she conceded. "Or maybe they'd finally see what they've been taking for granted all these years." I didn't respond, but as I drove home that night, her words kept echoing in my mind. Just stop. Just once. See what happens. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating, like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing you should step back but wondering what it would feel like to jump. So I stopped. Just once. The following Sunday dawned clear and hot, the kind of Georgia summer day where the air feels like a warm, wet blanket. By 9 a.m. my phone was already buzzing with the usual pre-barbecue messages in the family group chat. "Can't wait to see everyone today," Diane wrote, followed by a string of heart emojis. "Bringing some friends from work," Brandon added. "They've heard all about our legendary Sunday cookouts." Legendary. As if the food prepared itself. I watched the messages pile up. Aunt Linda asking if she should bring her potato salad, which nobody ever ate. Cousin Mike promising to arrive on time. He never did. Everyone coordinating, planning, buzzing with excitement. Nobody asked what I was bringing. Nobody asked if I needed anything for the grill. It was just assumed I would. Show up, as reliable as the sunrise, with enough food to feed an army and the patience to cook it all to perfection. For the first time in 12 years, I turned off my phone and went back to bed. I slept until noon, something I hadn't done since college. When I finally checked my phone again, I had 17 missed calls and twice as many text messages. Most were from Diane, starting with casual. Questions about my timing, escalating to concerned inquiries about my whereabouts, and finally culminating in barely disguised irritation. Her last message came through at 2:37 p.m. "Hope you're okay. We had to order pizza. Brandon's friends were disappointed. Just FYI. No, are you hurt? No, did something happen? Just disappointment that I'd disrupted their plans, that I'd failed to perform. My expected function." I didn't respond. Instead, I spent the rest of the day doing something I'd almost forgotten how to do. Whatever I wanted. I took a long walk in the park near my apartment. I stopped at a bookstore and browsed for an hour. I treated myself to dinner at a small Italian place where the owner knew my name because I graded his daughter's English essays. "No family today, Mr. Monroe?" he asked as he refilled my wine glass. "No, Tony, just me today." He nodded appreciatively. Sometimes that's the best company. When I got home, I had one more message waiting. Not from Diane or Brandon, but from Sophie. "Missed you today. Hope everything's all right. The pizza was terrible for what it's worth." I smiled at my phone, then set it aside without replying. I wasn't ready to explain myself, not even to her. I needed to sit with this feeling a little longer, this strange mix of guilt and liberation, like I'd escaped from a prison I hadn't even known I was in. Monday morning, I was back in my classroom, teaching summer school to a group of juniors who'd failed English during the regular year. We were reading The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, and the irony wasn't lost. On me as I guided them through discussions of visibility, identity, and the way society can erase a person without even realizing it. The narrator isn't physically invisible, I explained to 17 bored teenagers who were secretly checking their phones under their desks. He's invisible because people refuse to see him. They see only what they expect to see, what they want to see. Maria, one of my brightest students despite her attendance issues, looked up from her copy of the book. "So it's not about him at all. It's about them. Their failure, not his." I paused, struck by the simplicity and truth of her observation. Yes, exactly. By Wednesday, the family group chat had moved on to other topics. Nobody mentioned the barbecue fiasco again. It was as if my absence had been a minor. As glitch quickly corrected and forgotten, that's when I knew what I had to do. The next Sunday, I showed up at Diane's house at the usual time. But instead of my normal load, coolers of marinated meat, bags of charcoal, homemade sauces and sides, I brought only one thing: a plastic bag from the Gas and Go containing frozen burger patties and hot dogs. Diane's eyes widened when she opened the door. "Oh, you're back." We were starting to worry. She peered behind me, looking for my usual supplies. "Where's everything else?" "This is it," I said, holding up the bag. "Thought I'd keep it simple today." Her smile faltered, but quickly recovered. "Well, I suppose that's fine for today. You've been so reliable for so long, you deserve a break. Brandon picked up some steaks just in case anyway." Of course he did. Of course they'd planned a backup. I followed her through the house to the backyard where the usual crowd was already gathered. Brandon was standing by the grill, poking at the coals with a long metal tool, playing the part of the grill master with an ease that made my stomach clench. "Look who's here," Diane announced, drawing everyone's attention. Brandon straightened up, grinning. "Uncle E, you're alive. We thought maybe you'd finally run off with that mysterious girlfriend you never talk about." He laughed at his own joke, a running gag about my perpetual singlehood that had stopped being funny around year 3. I didn't smile back. Instead, I walked straight to the metal prep table beside the grill and dropped my bag of frozen meat with that loud, decisive clang. That silenced the entire gathering. That brings us back to where I started. The silence, the stares. The first moment in 12 years that they actually saw me, or rather, saw the absence of what I usually provided. "Is this a joke, Uncle Ethan?" Brandon repeated, his smile strained now. "No joke," I said again, placing the tray on the outdoor table without ceremony. "I figured I'd just do what the rest of you do, bring whatever, show up late and let someone else clean." The silence stretched on, uncomfortable and revealing. People shifted their weight, avoided eye contact, suddenly fascinated by their drinks or their phones. No one knew what to say because no one had ever had to acknowledge what I did before. It had simply happened, week after week, like magic. Finally, Uncle Ray broke the silence. "I remember your dad grilling every Sunday before his arthritis got too bad," he said, his gravelly voice carrying across the patio. "He always said Ethan was the only one who stood beside him without needing praise." All eyes turned to Ray, then swiveled back to me. I felt heat rising in my face that had nothing to do with the grill. "And I remember Ethan using his own money to fix that. Busted grill 2 summers ago," Ray continued, sipping his beer casually. "Didn't even ask for a dime." He set his cup down with deliberate care. "Funny how we only notice someone's work when they stop doing it." Diane cleared her throat, the high color in her cheeks betraying her discomfort. "Ray, nobody's saying we don't appreciate Ethan. Of course we do." "Do you?" Sophie asked quietly from the corner where she'd been watching the whole scene unfold. "Because in 7 years I've never heard anyone thank him. Not once." "That's not fair," Brandon protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Uncle E knows we appreciate him. Right, Uncle E?" All eyes turned to me again, expectant, waiting for me to smooth things over, to laugh it off, to go back to being reliable, invisible Ethan who never made waves. But something had shifted inside me. The Ethan who would have done that had disappeared somewhere between last Sunday and this one, replaced by someone I barely recognized but instantly respected. Someone who valued himself enough to demand that others do the same. "I don't think I do know that, actually," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I think I've been telling myself that for 12 years because it was easier than admitting the truth." "And what truth is that?" Diane asked, her tone carrying a warning edge. I looked around at the faces of my family, these people I'd fed and served and cleaned up after for over a decade. These people who had photos of every Sunday gathering, not one of which included me. The truth is that I've been a ghost at my own family gatherings, and today is the first day anyone's noticed I have a pulse. No one knew what to say after that. The awkward silence stretched until Brandon, ever the social director, clapped his hands together and announced, "Well, let's get these burgers going then." He reached for the frozen patties, but I stepped forward and put my hand on the package. "Actually, I think I'll sit this one out. I'm sure you can handle it." Brandon blinked, confusion etched across his face. "But you always do the grilling." "Exactly," I said, then walked away from the grill, a place I'd stood for countless hours, and took a seat in one of the patio chairs at the far end of the yard next to Uncle Ray. Ray handed me a beer without a word. I accepted it, twisting off the cap and taking a long pull. It was cold and bitter, exactly what I needed. The party resumed, albeit with a strange, discordant energy. People spoke in hushed tones, glancing my way when they thought I wouldn't notice. Brandon struggled with the grill, the flames leaping too high, then dying down too low. The frozen patties stuck to the grates, crumbling when he tried to flip them. Someone went inside and came back with more beer, as if alcohol might smooth over the jagged edges of the moment. Sophie drifted toward us, settling into a chair on my other side. "That was quite an entrance," she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. I shrugged. 12 years overdue, maybe. Better late than never. She clinked her glass against my bottle. "How does it feel?" I considered the question, watching as Brandon cursed and jumped, back from a sudden flare-up on the grill. "Strange," I admitted, "like I'm wearing someone else's clothes." "You'll get used to it," Ray said, speaking up for the first time since his earlier declaration. "Standing up for yourself gets easier with practice." I turned to look at him. This quiet uncle who'd been on the periphery of my life for as long as I could remember. "Sounds like you're speaking from experience." He gazed into his beer. "Your father and I were a lot alike, both of us too quiet for our own good. By the time I figured out how to speak up, most people had stopped listening." He nodded toward the grill, where Brandon was now frantically scraping charred meat from the grates. "Don't wait as long as I did." I nodded, letting his words sink in. We sat in comfortable silence as the smell of burnt food wafted across the yard. Eventually Diane approached, her smile tight and diplomatic. "Ethan, can I talk to you for a minute?" "Inside." I followed her through the sliding glass doors into the kitchen. Mom's kitchen once, now transformed by Diane's modernizing touch. Granite countertops had replaced the worn laminate. Stainless steel appliances gleamed where Mom's avocado green ones had stood. Nothing remained of the woman who had taught me to cook, to serve, to love through food. Diane turned to face me, arms crossed. "What exactly are you trying to prove here?" "I'm not trying to prove anything, Diane. I'm just done being taken for granted." She sighed, the sound weary and impatient. "Nobody takes you for granted. We all know you're the grill master. It's your thing." "It's not my thing," I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. "It's labor, it's time, it's money. And not once in 12 years has anyone offered to help, or pay for supplies, or even clean up afterward." "You never asked," she protested. "Should I have to ask? When someone cooks for you every week for 12 years, shouldn't offering to help be automatic?" She threw up her hands. "Not everyone thinks like you do, Ethan. Some of us assumed you enjoyed it, that it was your way of contributing." "And how do you contribute, Diane?" The question hung between us, dangerous and electric. Diane's eyes narrowed. "This is my house. I host. I invite people. I keep this family together." I laughed, a short, harsh sound that surprised even me. "This is our house, Diane. Mom and Dad left it to both of us, remember? But you moved in and took over before the funeral flowers had wilted." Color flooded her face. "I had Brandon to think about. He needed stability. And I needed family," I said quietly. "But I got turned into the help instead." She stared at me, her expression a mix of anger and something else, guilt maybe, or simply surprise at hearing me speak my mind. After so many years of silence, before she could respond, the sliding door opened and Brandon stuck his head in. "Mom, Uncle E, the burgers are, well, they're done, I guess, kind of, and the hot dog sort of exploded." Despite everything, I felt a small petty satisfaction at his failure, then immediately felt ashamed of that satisfaction. "Coming," Diane said, not taking her eyes off me. "We'll finish this conversation later." I shook my head. "No, I think we've said enough for one day." Back outside, the mood had shifted from awkward to downright tense. The food was a disaster. Burgers charred on the outside, raw in the middle. Hot dogs split and shriveled beyond recognition. People pushed the meat around on their plates, taking tiny bites and washing them down with large gulps of beer or soda. I ate my share without complaint. It was, after all, exactly what I'd brought. Cheap frozen meat with no preparation, no love. I was eating my own apathy, and it tasted exactly as bad as I deserved. As the afternoon wore on, people began to leave earlier than usual. Excuses were made. Work tomorrow, kids' bedtimes, sudden headaches. Within an hour, the yard had cleared to half its normal crowd. By 6, only the core family remained. Diane, Brandon, Uncle Ray, Sophie, who wasn't family but had somehow become a fixture anyway, and me. We sat in strained silence until Ray stood up, stretching his back with a groan. "Well, this has been educational. I think I'll head home now." He patted my shoulder as he passed. "You did good, kid," he murmured, too low for the others to hear. Then he was gone, the gate clicking shut behind him. Brandon began collecting plates and cups, a task I'd always handled before. He was clumsy at it, dropping napkins, stacking plates too high so they slid apart. But he was trying, and that counted for something. Sophie moved to help him, her efficiency making his efforts look even more haphazard. They worked in silence, stealing glances at each other that I couldn't quite interpret. Diane remained seated, her eyes fixed on some middle distance. When she finally spoke, her voice was subdued. "I didn't know you felt that way about the house." I sighed. "It's not about the house, Diane. It's about being seen, being valued." She nodded slowly. "I can see that now. I think we've all been blind for a long time." It wasn't an apology, not exactly. But from Diane it was as close as I was likely to get. I accepted it with a nod of my own. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, I stood to leave. Unlike every other Sunday, I didn't stay to clean up. I didn't check that the grill was properly shut down. I simply picked up my keys and headed for the gate. "Ethan," Diane called after me. I paused, turning. "Will you be here next week?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with unspoken meaning. Will you forgive us? Will you go back to the way things were? Will you still be our grill master, our invisible backbone? I thought about it for a long moment. "I don't know," I said finally. "I need some time to think." And with that, I walked away from 12 years of Sundays, into an evening that felt both terrifying and full of possibility. The following week passed in a strange haze. I went through my daily routines, teaching summer school, grading papers, watering the small herb garden on my apartment balcony, but everything felt slightly off, as if I'd stepped into a parallel universe where the physical details were the same, but the emotional landscape had shifted entirely. My phone remained unusually quiet. The family group chat, normally buzzing with daily trivialities, had gone silent. No one seemed to know what to say or how to address what had happened. It was as if we'd all wandered off script and were waiting for someone to tell us what came next. On Thursday evening, as I was chopping basil from my garden to sprinkle over a simple pasta dinner, cooking for one had become a peaceful ritual, so different from the mass production of Sunday barbecues, my phone finally chimed with a message. It wasn't from Diane or Brandon, as I'd half expected. It was from Sophie. "Coffee tomorrow, 4 p.m. at Reveille on Main." No pressure, just coffee. I stared at the message, a strange flutter in my chest. Sophie and I had never met outside of the Sunday gatherings. Our relationship, whatever it was, had always been contained within the boundaries of Diane's backyard. This felt like crossing a threshold, though I couldn't have explained exactly why. I typed back, "Sounds good." The next day, I arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early, a habit ingrained from years of being the first to show up at the barbecues. The place was busy with the afternoon crowd. Students from the nearby community college hunched over laptops, young professionals having early Friday meetings, a few retirees lingering over chess games in the corner. I claimed a small table by the window and ordered a black coffee, watching the door. At exactly 4 p.m. Sophie walked in, punctual like me. She was dressed in scrubs, coming straight from her shift at the hospital, I guessed, her auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked tired but smiled when she spotted me. "You came," she said, sliding into the chair opposite mine. I said I would. "Yes, but after Sunday," she shrugged. "Let's just say I wasn't sure what version of Ethan I'd be meeting today." I laughed, surprised by her directness. "That makes 2 of us." She ordered a latte and a blueberry muffin, then turned her full attention back to me. "So how are you, really?" I paused, considering. Most people ask that question as a formality, expecting the standard, "Fine, thanks," in response. But Sophie's eyes were intent, genuinely interested. "I'm disoriented," I admitted. Like I've been wearing a mask for so long that I've forgotten what my actual face looks like. She nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. You've been playing a role for years. Now you're having to figure out who you are without it. Exactly. And the strange thing is, I'm not even sure I want to go back to being the grill master. Part of me misses it, the routine, the sense of purpose, but another part feels relieved. Freedom often feels that way at first, she said, breaking off a piece of her muffin and offering it to me. I took it, our fingers brushing briefly. Scary but exhilarating. We talked for nearly 2 hours, long after our coffee had gone cold. I learned more about Sophie in those 120 minutes than I had in 7 years of Sunday barbecues. She was 41, 3 years younger than me, divorced from a surgeon who'd cheated on her with a pharmaceutical rep. She had no children but volunteered at a youth center on weekends. She'd met Diane during their nursing training and had stuck with her through various hospital departments, eventually landing in the cardiac unit where they both still worked. Diane's actually a good friend, Sophie said, surprising me. She can be self-centered, but she's loyal. When my ex was dragging me through the divorce, she let me stay at her place for 2 months, refused to take a dime for rent. I absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with my own experience of my sister. That sounds like the Diane I knew growing up, I said finally. Before your parents died. I nodded. She changed after that, hardened somehow. Or maybe I just started seeing a side of her that was always there. Sophie regarded me thoughtfully. Grief does strange things to people. Some get softer, some get harder, some just get lost. And which was I? Lost, I think, she said gently, until last Sunday. As the coffee shop began to empty out, Sophie glanced at her watch and sighed. I should go. Early shift tomorrow. We stood and walked to the door together, a strange awkwardness suddenly descending as we reached the sidewalk. This was nice, I said, feeling absurdly like a teenager after a first date. It was. She hesitated, then added, Listen, Ethan, there's something else I wanted to talk to you about. Oh? I'm having a small gathering at my place on Sunday. Just a few friends, nothing fancy, just a potluck. I thought you might like to come. I blinked, caught off guard. Sunday had been family day for so long that the idea of spending it elsewhere felt almost sacrilegious. What about the barbecue? What about it? She countered. You said yourself you're not sure you want to go back to that role. But I didn't say I was done with my family altogether. She touched my arm lightly. I'm not asking you to choose, Ethan. I'm just offering an alternative. One Sunday where you're just a guest, where you can bring a store-bought pie and no one will think twice about it. The idea was tempting, more than tempting. Who else will be there? Just some friends from the hospital. Oh, and Ray. I invited him too. Uncle Ray. I was genuinely surprised. How do you even know him outside of the barbecues? She smiled. He volunteers at the hospital 3 days a week, reads to kids in the pediatric ward. We've been friends for years. I shook my head, amazed at how little I knew about the lives of people I'd seen every week for over a decade. Ray never mentioned that. Would anyone have listened if he had? The question stung with its truth. How many conversations had I missed while I was focused on the grill, on the timing, on making sure everyone else was fed and happy? What time on Sunday? I asked finally. Her smile widened. 2 o'clock. And Ethan? Bring whatever you want, or nothing at all. It really doesn't matter. As I drove home, I realized I was smiling, really smiling, for the first time in days, maybe longer. When I checked my phone that night, there was a message from Diane in the family group chat. Sunday barbecue this week? 1 p.m.? Several. People had already responded with enthusiastic confirmations. I stared at the screen, feeling the weight of expectation pressing down on me. This was the moment of truth. If I said yes, things would slide back to the way they'd been. Perhaps with some initial awkwardness, some half-hearted offers of help that would quickly fade. If I said no, well, that was uncharted territory. Instead of responding in the group, I called Diane directly. Ethan, she answered on the first ring, her voice cautious. I was hoping you'd call. About Sunday, I began, then found myself at a loss for words. We want you there, she said quickly. All of us. Brandon's even taken a grilling class. Can you believe it? He wants to help. The image of Brandon at a cooking class made me smile despite myself. That's good to hear. But Diane, I can't come this week. I have other plans. A pause. Other plans? On Sunday. The disbelief in her voice would have been comical if it weren't so revealing. In her mind, what else could possibly compete with the family barbecue? What else could I, reliable Ethan, possibly have to do? Yes, I said firmly. I've been invited to a friend's place for lunch. A friend, she repeated slowly. Anyone I know. Sophie, actually. Another longer pause. Sophie invited you to her place? On a Sunday? Yes. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head. I see. It's not what you're thinking, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure what she was thinking. It's just lunch with friends. Of course, she said, her voice neutral now. Well, we'll miss you, but next week maybe. I took a deep breath. I don't know, Diane. I need some time to figure things out. I can't just go back to the way things were. No one's asking you to, she protested. Things will be different, I promise. But promises were easy to make and hard to keep, especially when they required a fundamental shift in perspective. I wasn't convinced that one dramatic Sunday had been enough to change patterns established over 12 years. Let me think about it, I said finally. That's all I can offer right now. She accepted this with better grace than I'd expected. Okay, but the door is always open, Ethan. Remember that. As we hung up, I wondered if that was true. Had the door ever really been open, or had I just been allowed in through the service entrance all this time? Sunday arrived bright and clear, another perfect Georgia summer day. I stood in my kitchen, contemplating what to bring to Sophie's. The habit of preparation was hard to break. My instinct was to cook something impressive, to show up with arms laden with food. Instead, I drove to the bakery near my apartment and bought a peach pie. Store-bought, just as Sophie had suggested. It felt strangely liberating. Sophie's home was a surprise, a small but charming craftsman bungalow on a tree-lined street just outside of Riverbend. The front yard was a riot of wildflowers, untamed but beautiful. As I walked up the path to her door, pie in hand, I felt none of the tension that had become synonymous with Sundays, just curiosity and a light, unfamiliar sensation that took me a moment to identify as anticipation. Sophie answered the door in a flowing sundress, her hair loose around her shoulders, so different from her practical hospital scrubs that I almost didn't recognize her. You came, she said, just as she had at the coffee shop, her smile warm and genuine. I brought pie, I replied, holding up my offering like a shield. She laughed. Perfect. Come in. Meet everyone. I followed her into a living room that was the opposite of Diane's pristine, magazine-worthy space. Sophie's home was cozy and eclectic, bookshelves overflowing, comfortable mismatched furniture, walls covered with art that looked like it had been chosen for love rather than to impress. It felt lived in, authentic. A small group was gathered in the adjoining dining area, 3 women, and 2 men, all engaged in animated conversation. Uncle Ray sat among them, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen him, laughing at something one of the women had said. He spotted me and raised his glass in greeting. Ethan, good to see you on this side of town. Sophie made quick introductions. The others were all colleagues from the hospital, their names washing over me in a blur. They welcomed me easily, making space at the table, pouring me a glass of wine, including me in their conversation as if I'd always been part of their circle. The food was laid out buffet-style on Sophie's kitchen counter, a mishmash of dishes that somehow complemented each other perfectly. There was a huge salad, a vegetable lasagna, homemade bread, a spicy chickpea curry. Help yourself, Sophie said. There's no protocol here. Eat what you want when you want. I filled a plate, struck by the novelty of being served rather than serving. When I returned to the table, the conversation had turned to hospital politics, inside jokes I didn't understand. But unlike at the family barbecues, where I'd often felt invisible, here people made an effort to include me, explaining references, asking my opinion. So, you're a teacher? Asked Mia, an ER nurse with a sleeve of colorful tattoos. What grade? High school English, I said. Juniors and seniors mostly. God, teenagers, she groaned. Rather you than me. I'll stick with bleeding people. At least I know how to fix them. Everyone laughed, and I found myself joining in easily. Ethan's being modest, Ray said, surprising me. He's not just a teacher. He's the one all the tough cases get sent to. The kids other teachers have given up on. I stared at him. How do you know that? He shrugged. Your principal volunteers at the hospital too. He speaks highly of you. Again, I was struck by how interconnected these lives were. and how separate they'd been from mine despite our weekly gatherings. I'd been so focused on my role, on my responsibility to feed and serve, that I'd missed the broader web of relationships forming around me. As the afternoon wore on, I felt myself relaxing in a way I hadn't in years. There was no timetable here, no schedule of when the meat had to be ready, when dessert should be served. People ate when they were hungry, refilled their plates as they pleased, helped themselves to seconds of wine or Sophie's homemade lemonade. At one point I found myself alone in the kitchen with Ray, both of us getting more water. "Different kind of Sunday, huh?" he said, his voice low. "Very different," I agreed. "But good. I didn't realize you knew Sophie so well. There's a lot you don't know about a lot of people, Ethan." He said it without judgment, a simple observation. "When you're always behind the grill, you miss the conversations happening at the tables." The truth of this hit me hard. "I'm starting to see that." He patted my shoulder. Better late than never. Back in the dining room, Sophie had put on music. Not the generic pop playlist that Brandon always controlled at the barbecues, but a mix of jazz and blues that created a mellow backdrop to the conversation. People had started to move from the dining area to the more comfortable living room, sprawling on sofas and armchairs. I found myself next to Sophie on a small love seat, our knees almost touching. "This is nice," I said, gesturing vaguely to encompass the room, the people, the entire afternoon. "Thank you for inviting me." "I've been wanting to for years," she admitted. "But you always seemed so committed to the family gatherings." "Trapped, you mean?" She tilted her head, considering. "Maybe, but there's something admirable about loyalty, even if it's misplaced." "Was it misplaced?" "Only you can answer that." She touched my hand briefly. "But I'm glad you're here now." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow through Sophie's windows, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out to find multiple messages from the family group chat, photos of today's barbecue, Brandon at the grill wearing an apron that said Grill Sergeant, the same nickname his friends had mockingly given me, Diane serving a platter of what looked like slightly overdone chicken, a group shot of everyone raising their glasses, and then a direct message from Diane. "Wish you were here. It's not the same without you." I stared at the photos, trying to identify the emotion rising in my chest. It wasn't jealousy exactly, not anger, something more complex, a mixture of nostalgia, relief, and a strange sense of freedom. They'd managed without me. The world hadn't ended. The family tradition hadn't collapsed without its invisible backbone, and I'd discovered there was life beyond the grill, beyond the role I'd locked myself into for 12 long years. As I slipped my phone back into my pocket, Sophie caught my eye. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said, surprised to find I meant it. "Everything's good." Later, as the gathering began to wind down, people departed in twos and threes, thanking Sophie for hosting, promising to do it again soon. I helped clear plates and glasses without being asked, a habit too ingrained to break. "You don't have to do that," Sophie said, finding me loading her dishwasher. "I know, but I want to." And I did. The difference was enormous, choosing to help rather than being expected to serve. Ray left with Mia and another colleague, giving me a knowing look as he went. "See you around, Ethan, maybe next week." "Maybe," I said, not committing either way. Soon, only Sophie and I remained. We finished cleaning in companionable silence, moving around each other in the small kitchen with unexpected ease, as if we'd done this dance many times before. "More wine?" she offered when we were done, holding up a half-empty bottle. "Just one more glass," I agreed. "I should head home soon, work tomorrow." We took our wine to her back porch, a small, screened-in space overlooking a garden that was as charmingly untamed as the front yard. Fairy lights hung from the ceiling, creating a soft, magical glow as darkness fell. "Thank you for today," I said, settling into a wicker chair. It was exactly what I needed. "Good." She curled up in the chair beside mine, tucking her feet underneath her. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "What will you do next Sunday?" I took a sip of wine, considering. "I don't know. Part of me wants to go back to see if things really will be different. Another part thinks it's too soon, that I need more distance to figure out what I actually want." "And what do you want, Ethan? Beyond next Sunday, I mean." The question caught me off guard. What did I want? I'd spent so long fulfilling others' expectations that I'd almost forgotten how to have desires of my own. I began, then stopped, searching for the right words. I want to be seen, not just for what I do, but for who I am. I want relationships that go both ways, where I give and receive in equal measure. I want Sundays that don't feel like an obligation. That sounds reasonable to me, she said softly. What about you? I asked, turning the question back on her. What do you want? She smiled, the fairy lights reflecting in her eyes. Right now, I want you to know that my door is always open on Sundays. Whether you come every week or once a year, whether you bring a gourmet feast or nothing at all. She hesitated, then added, and I want you to know that I see you, Ethan. I always have. Something shifted between us in that moment, a subtle realignment, a new possibility opening up. I reached across the space between our chairs and took her hand. She interlaced her fingers with mine, her skin warm against my palm. We sat like that, hand in hand, watching the fireflies begin to dance in her garden, neither of us feeling the need to fill the silence with words. 3 Sundays passed. I spent each one at Sophie's, sometimes with her friends, sometimes just the two of us. We cooked together, simple meals that we enjoyed on her screened porch, talking for hours about books, films, our childhoods, our dreams. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly being heard, truly being seen. During the week, life continued. I taught my summer classes, graded papers, tended my herbs. Sophie and I met for coffee or dinner when our schedules aligned. It was casual, unhurried, but undeniably heading somewhere. We didn't put a label on it, but I found myself thinking of her at odd moments, smiling at random memories of her laugh, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, the gentle touch of her hand on mine. Each Sunday, the family group chat would buzz with photos from the barbecue. Brandon continued his attempts at grilling, gradually improving if the pictures were any indication. Diane sent me direct messages, first casual invitations to return, then increasingly pointed questions about my absence, finally shifting to genuine concern. Are you still upset with us? With me? She texted one evening. I considered how to respond. The anger that had fueled my dramatic stand had faded, replaced by a calmer, more measured assessment of what I wanted my relationship with my family to be moving forward. I'm not upset, I wrote back. I'm just taking some time for myself, learning who I am outside of Sunday barbecues. With Sophie? She asked immediately. I smiled at my phone. Among others, yes. Ray says you two look happy. So Ray had been reporting back. I wasn't surprised, nor was I bothered. We are. She's good for me. A long pause, then. I miss you, E. The house feels empty without you. The sincerity in those words caught me off guard. Diane wasn't one for emotional vulnerability. I miss you too, I admitted. But I needed this space. I know. I understand that now. Another pause. Would you consider coming back this Sunday? Just as a guest. No cooking, no cleaning. Brandon's actually gotten pretty good at the grill. Not as good as you, but decent. I stared at the message, feeling the familiar tug of family obligation warring with my newfound sense of self-determination. I thought about how to respond for a long time before typing, "Let me think about it." That night I called Sophie. Diane invited me to the barbecue this Sunday. Are you going to go? No judgment in her voice, just genuine curiosity. I don't know, part of me wants to see if things have really changed. Another part is afraid they haven't, she finished for me. Yeah, or that they have, but will slowly slide back once the novelty wears off. She was quiet for a moment. You know, you could always invite them here instead, to my place, neutral territory. The suggestion took me by surprise. You'd do that? Host my family? Why not? I've been hearing about them for months. Might as well meet the infamous Monroes in person. I could hear the smile in her voice. Besides, it would change the dynamic completely. New location, new rules. The idea had merit. A fresh start on neutral ground. I'll think about it, I promised. The next morning, I called Diane. I've been thinking about Sunday. And? The hope in her voice was palpable. What if we did something different? A change of venue? What did you have in mind? Sophie has offered to host at her place. A kind of combined gathering. Her friends, our family. A pause. Sophie wants to host the family barbecue? Not exactly. More like a potluck. Everyone brings something. Everyone helps. No one person responsible for Everything. Another longer pause. This is important to you, isn't it? It is, I confirmed. It's not about the food, Diane. It's about the balance. About everyone contributing. Everyone being seen. She sighed. All right, I'll tell the others. What time? 2 o'clock. And Diane, thank you. For what? For being willing to try something new. Sunday arrived with a mix of anticipation and anxiety churning in my stomach. Sophie and I spent the morning preparing her house, moving furniture to create more seating, setting up extra tables in the backyard, making a large salad and a simple dessert together. Other than that, we agreed. Everything would be brought by the guests. Are you nervous? She asked, as we stood back to survey our work. A little, I admitted. This feels significant, she squeezed my hand. It is, but significant doesn't have to mean stressful. Her friends arrived first, Mia, Carlos, Tessa, and the others I'd come to know over the past few weeks. They set out their contributions on the kitchen counter. Homemade bread, a vegetable curry, a platter of grilled vegetables, a pitcher of sangria. Uncle Ray arrived next, bearing a chocolate cake that he admitted with a wink had come from the bakery. No shame in store-bought, he said, placing it among the other offerings. At exactly 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang again. Sophie gave my hand one final squeeze before going to answer it. I heard Diane's voice in the entryway, followed by Brandon's deeper tones and the murmur of other family members, Aunt Linda, Cousin Mike, and a few others who'd been Sunday regulars for years. They filed into the living room, looking around with undisguised curiosity. Diane was carrying a large casserole dish, and Brandon had what looked like a platter of grilled chicken covered in foil. Others held bottles of wine, side dishes, desserts. This is cozy, Diane said, taking in Sophie's eclectic decor. She didn't say it unkindly, but I could hear the comparison to her own more formal home in her tone. Thank you, Sophie replied warmly. I've heard so much about all of you. I'm glad we could finally do this. There was an awkward moment as the two groups, Sophie's hospital friends and my family, regarded each other across the living room. Then Ray stepped forward as he had that fateful day on Diane's patio, breaking the silence. I recommend for the sangria, he said, raising his glass. Mia makes it with fresh peaches. It was a small thing, but it bridged the gap. People began to move, to mingle, to introduce themselves. Brandon, ever the social butterfly, was soon deep in conversation with Carlos about local breweries. Diane hesitantly accepted a glass of sangria from Mia, complimenting her on the recipe. I stood back, watching it unfold, a strange sense of satisfaction settling over me. These were two halves of my life coming together, the past and what might be the future, meeting in the present. Sophie appeared at my side. So far, so good, she murmured. Better than I expected, I agreed. Food's ready whenever people want to eat, she said, gesturing to the laden counter. No schedule, remember? No schedule, I repeated, still getting used to the concept of a gathering without rigid timing, without the pressure of serving everything at the perfect moment. As people began to fill their plates, moving between the kitchen and the backyard where additional seating had been set up, I found myself next to Diane at the food table. This is different, she said, surveying the potluck spread. Good different, or bad different? She considered for a moment. Just different. It's nice not having to host, I'll admit. Your Sophie has a lovely home. She's not my Sophie, I said automatically, then caught myself. Well, maybe she is in a way. We're figuring it out. Diane gave me a knowing look. I've seen the way you look at her, and the way she looks at you. Some things don't need figuring out, E. They just are. I was saved from responding by Brandon, who approached with a plate piled high with food. Uncle E, you've got to try my chicken. I've been practicing for weeks, even took a class at the community center. I heard, I said, smiling at his enthusiasm. I'm impressed. Not as good as yours, he admitted, lowering his voice. But I'm learning. Turns out it's not as easy as you made. It took all those years. It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement of my years of unrecognized labor that I'd heard from him. Thanks, Brandon. That means a lot. As the afternoon progressed, something remarkable happened. The two groups began to blend, to find common ground, to share stories and laughter. Aunt Linda got into a spirited debate with Tessa about the best way to grow tomatoes. Cousin Mike discovered that Carlos coached youth soccer at the same complex where Mike's son played. Mia and Brandon exchanged phone numbers, a spark of interest evident in their interactions. And throughout it all, people helped themselves to food, refilled their own drinks, cleared their own plates. When Sophie brought out the desserts, several people jumped up to help distribute them. When a glass of wine spilled on the porch, 3 people rushed to clean it up. No single person was responsible for the success of the gathering. Everyone contributed. Everyone was seen. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over Sophie's backyard, I found myself sitting with Diane and Ray on the porch steps, watching the others scattered across the yard in small conversational groups. This was, nice, Diane said, surprising me. Different, but nice. Ray nodded. Kind of reminds me of how things used to be before Mum and Dad died, I finished for him. Yeah. He looked at me thoughtfully. Your mum would have liked this. The way everyone pitches in, the way everyone matters. Diane was quiet for a moment. I think I got so caught up in preserving the tradition, the Sunday gatherings, the family home, that I forgot what it was actually supposed to be about. Which is, I prompted, connection, support, everyone having a place at the table. She sighed. I'm sorry, Ethan, for not seeing how unbalanced things had become, for taking you for granted all these years. The apology, simple but sincere, loosened something that had been tight in my chest for a very long time. Thank you, I said quietly. That means a lot. She looked out at the yard, at the fairy lights that had begun to twinkle in the gathering dusk, at Sophie laughing with Brandon and Mia. So, what happens now? Is this the new tradition? Sundays at Sophie's? I considered the question. I don't think it has to be one or the other. Maybe we alternate. Some Sundays at your place, some here. The important thing is that it's different going forward. More balanced, more inclusive. I can work with that, she said, offering me a tentative smile. As the evening wound down, people began to leave in small groups, thanking Sophie profusely, making plans for future gatherings. The ease with which my two worlds had merged left me feeling strangely emotional, a mixture of relief, hope, and a quiet pride that I'd finally found the courage to demand the change I needed. Diane was one of the last to leave. She hugged me tightly at the door, something she hadn't done in years. Don't be a stranger, E, she whispered. The house is still yours too, whenever you want it. After everyone had gone, Sophie and I moved around her home, straightening furniture, gathering stray glasses, working, together in comfortable silence. That went well, she said finally, collapsing onto the couch. Better than I expected, honestly. I sat beside her, suddenly exhausted but deeply content. Thank you for doing this, for creating a space where everyone could just be, she smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder. That's what homes are supposed to be, aren't they? Places where people can be themselves, be seen for who they really are. I turned to look at her, this woman who had seen me when I was invisible to everyone else, who had offered me a different kind of Sunday when I needed it most. Yes, I said softly, that's exactly what they're supposed to be. 6 months later, on a crisp October Sunday, I stood in Diane's kitchen, slicing tomatoes for a salad. Through the window I could see Brandon at the grill, expertly flipping burgers while chatting with Mia, who had become a regular at our family gatherings. And in Brandon's life, Sophie was on the patio, arranging flowers on the tables with Aunt Linda, their heads bent together in conversation. Uncle Ray sat nearby in his favorite chair, reading a book but occasionally looking up to observe the scene with quiet satisfaction. The dynamics had shifted dramatically since that fateful day, when I dropped frozen meat on the counter and walked away from 12 years of invisible service. We'd settled into a new rhythm, alternating between Diane's house and Sophie's, with everyone contributing dishes, everyone helping with setup and cleanup. Even the location of the grill had changed. It was now positioned centrally on the patio rather than isolated in the corner, making the act of cooking a social one rather than a solitary burden. Brandon had become surprisingly passionate about grilling, often calling me during the week to discuss techniques or recipes. I'd become his mentor rather than his servant, a role that brought us closer than we'd been since he was a child. Diane entered the kitchen, carrying empty glasses to refill. Need any help? She asked, a question that still surprised me every time she asked it. I'm almost done here, I said, adding the sliced tomatoes to the salad bowl. But you could take this out while I finish the dressing. She nodded, picking up the bowl. Sophie said to tell you that Carlos and Tessa are on their way. Something about a flat tire, but they're back on the road now. The easy way she mentioned Sophie's friends, who had become family friends over the past months, warmed me. The integration of our two worlds had been more successful than I could have imagined, creating a richer, more diverse community than the insular family circle of before. As Diane headed back outside, I mixed olive oil, vinegar, and herbs for the dressing, thinking about how much had changed. I still cooked for these gatherings, but now because I wanted to, not because it was expected. I appeared in the photos that circulated in the family group chat. I was included in conversations, in plans, in the general flow of family life. But the biggest change had happened just last month, when Sophie and I decided to move in together. We'd chosen a new place, neither her cozy bungalow nor my stark apartment, but a fresh start in a craftsman-style house halfway between Diane's neighborhood and the hospital where Sophie worked. It had a large kitchen where we cooked together most nights, a spacious backyard, perfect for gatherings, and a small study where I could grade papers and work on the novel I'd finally started writing after years of telling myself I didn't have the time. Sophie appeared in the doorway, her auburn hair catching the afternoon light. "Everything okay in here? You've been quiet." I smiled, setting down the whisk. "Just thinking." "Dangerous pastime," she teased, coming to stand beside me. "Care to share?" "I was thinking about how much has changed, how different Sundays feel now." She nodded, understanding immediately. "Better different? Or just different?" "Better," I said without hesitation. "Definitely better." She kissed my cheek. "Good, because I have some news that might change things even more." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" She took a deep breath, a mixture of nervousness and excitement playing across her face. "I got a call from Dr. Patel this morning. The tests came back positive. For a moment, I didn't understand. Then, realization dawned and I felt my heart skip a beat. "You're pregnant," she confirmed, her eyes searching mine. 12 weeks along. Dr. Patel says everything looks perfect." I stood frozen, the dressing forgotten, as a wave of emotions washed over me. Joy, terror, disbelief, and underneath it all a profound sense of rightness. Sophie and I had discussed children, tentatively at first, then, with increasing seriousness over the past few months. At 45, I'd begun to think that particular door had closed for me. But now, "We're going to have a baby," I said, testing the words, feeling them settle into reality. "We are." She bit her lip. "Is that okay? I know we've talked about it, but now that it's actually happening..." I cut her off by pulling her into my arms, holding her, close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "It's more than okay, it's everything." She relaxed against me, her arms tightening around my waist. "I was thinking we could tell everyone today, if you're ready." The idea of sharing this news with our blended family, the Monroes and Sophie's circle, now so interconnected that the boundaries had blurred, filled me with a strange, fierce pride. "Yes," I said, "let's tell them." We finished preparing the food together, moving around the kitchen in the synchronized dance we'd perfected over months of cooking side by side. As we carried the last dishes out to the patio, I felt a sense of anticipation building, a bubble of joy I could barely contain. The gathering was in full swing, people scattered across the yard in comfortable clusters, the air filled with conversation and laughter. Brandon was just removing the last burgers from the grill, his face flushed with heat and satisfaction. "Food's ready," he called, and people began to drift toward the tables. As everyone settled with full plates, I caught Sophie's eye. She nodded slightly, reaching for my hand under the table. I cleared my throat, standing up. Conversations quieted. Has attention turned my way? "I'd like to say something," I began, feeling uncharacteristically nervous. Public speeches had never been my forte. I'd always preferred to blend into the background. But that was the old Ethan, the invisible one. "First, I want to thank everyone for being here today. These Sundays have become something special over the past few months, something balanced, something real." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. "A year ago I was standing at that grill," I continued, pointing to the corner where it used to be stationed, feeling completely unseen, unappreciated, like I'd somehow become a function instead of a person. Diane lowered her eyes but nodded slightly, acknowledging the truth of my words. Then I did something I'd never done before. I stopped. I stepped away. I demanded, silently but clearly, to be seen. I squeezed Sophie's hand. And someone saw me. Had been seeing me all along, actually. Sophie smiled up at me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. That changed everything. It changed how I saw myself, how I related to all of you, how I thought about what family really means. I took a deep breath. And now, Sophie and I have some news that's going to change things even more. A hush fell over the gathering. Diane leaned forward slightly, her eyes darting between Sophie and me. "We're having a baby," I announced, the words sending a fresh thrill through me. "Due in April." For a moment, there was complete silence. Then the yard erupted in cheers, exclamations, questions all jumbled together. Diane was the first to reach us, wrapping Sophie in a careful hug before turning to me, her eyes wet. "A baby," she whispered. "Oh, Ethan, I'm so happy for you both." Brandon clapped me on the back, his face split in a wide grin. "I'm going to be a cousin. Or wait, would it be an uncle? How does that work?" "Uncle," I confirmed, laughing at his enthusiasm. "Uncle Brandon. I'm going to teach that kid everything I know. About grilling," he declared, "and video games, and God help us all," Mia interjected, pulling me into a hug. "Congratulations, Professor. You're going to be an amazing dad." As the congratulations continued, Uncle Ray made his way to my side. He didn't say anything, just clasped my shoulder with a weathered hand, his eyes conveying everything words couldn't. "Thanks, Ray," I said quietly. "For everything," he nodded. "Your dad would be proud of all of this." He gestured to the gathering, to Sophie, to the life I was building. "He always said you had it in you, the quiet strength, the patience to wait for what matters." The mention of my father, gone now for so many years, brought a lump to my throat. "I wish he could be here." "He is," Ray said simply. "In you, in what you've created." Here, as the excitement settled into a gentle buzz of baby-related conversations, nursery plans, name suggestions, offers of hand-me-down cribs and toys, Sophie and I found ourselves momentarily alone on the porch steps, watching our family, for that's what they all were now, related by blood or choice or both, enjoy the afternoon. "So," she said, leaning against me, "how does it feel to be the center of attention for once?" I laughed. "Strange, good strange, but still strange. You deserve it," she said firmly. "All of it. The recognition, the family, the baby, the happiness." I turned to look at her, this woman who had quietly changed my life by simply seeing me when no one else did. "So do you," she smiled, placing a hand on her still flat stomach. "It's going to be quite a ride." I can't think of anyone I'd rather take it with. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, I found myself thinking about that moment 6 months ago when I dropped frozen meat on a metal tray and broken 12 years of silence. The clang that had echoed across Diane's patio had been the sound of something breaking, yes, but also of something beginning. It had been the sound of me finding my voice, finding myself, finding the courage to demand the recognition I deserved. And now, surrounded by people who truly saw me, with Sophie beside me, and the promise of our child growing within her, I understood something I'd been missing all those years behind the grill. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. You don't have to be invisible to be valuable. And sometimes the loudest statement you can make is to simply stop doing what's expected and start doing what fulfills you. As we gathered for a group photo later that evening, everyone insisting that Sophie and I should be in the center, I thought about how this would be the first of many Sunday photographs where I wasn't behind the camera or hidden behind smoke. The first of many where I was seen, valued, included. The first of many Sundays where I wasn't just the grill master, but Ethan, friend, brother, uncle, partner, soon-to-be father, visible, present, whole. As Brandon set the timer on the camera and rushed to join us, I put my arm around Sophie, my hand resting lightly over our growing child. Diane stood on my other side, her arm linked through mine in a gesture of connection that would have been unimaginable a year ago. "Everyone say Sunday," Brandon called. "Sunday," we chorused, and the camera flashed, capturing the moment, not just our faces, but the story behind them. The story of how one Sunday changed everything, how one act of quiet rebellion led to a rebuilding of relationships, a rebalancing of expectations, a rebirth of family in its truest sense. And as I looked at the photo afterward, at my face among the faces of those I loved, I knew that I would never again be invisible. Not to them, not to myself. Sometimes, the loudest silence is the one that finally makes them hear you, and sometimes, being heard is all you need to find your way home.